Hey, what's up? Nick here with another DIY musician Photoshop tutorial. In this one, we're going to take a look at how to work with the art templates that you need to use to create a digipak. And in this video, it's really just going to be kind of a more of a technical look at how to work with the templates and not so much of a conceptual tutorial on how to make album artwork. I'll have some stuff like that coming up in the future, but again, this is really about how do I work with these templates. And if you are a musician or band who's trying to make a digipak and you're relatively new to Photoshop, then this is the video for you. And if you're watching this video, I can probably guarantee you that you probably know what a digipak is. But just in case, here's a picture of one up on the screen. This is one I did for a friend and client of mine, Sam Morrow. There's the outside, and we can see that a digipak, it's kind of like the new jewel case, whereas jewel cases are bad for the environment. They're a little expensive and not really ideal these days. And of course, the CD is definitely steadily declining, and it may not be here for that long, but CDs are still really a viable platform for most bands to get their music out there. So this is what the outside looks like. We've got a front cover, spine, we've got a back cover over here. And then on the inside, we have a plastic tray that the CD goes inside, and there is a graphic underneath that you can control what that is, or maybe you can just use a solid color. And then over here on the left, you have a basic 4-panel design, and this just means we have got some extra real estate here for things like credits, thank you, shout outs, that kind of thing. And depending on the digipak that you do, you may end up using or creating a booklet that can slide inside here, but that's obviously extra charge, completely up to you, and maybe not required. Now, of course, when it comes to doing the digipak, there's a lot of different places that you can get them printed, and that's totally up to you. And the good thing is that the size is not going to change depending on the print shop that you go to and those templates that we would use. Sometimes there are minor variations, but for the most part, they're almost exactly the same all over the place. So Disc Makers is one place that I've used a bunch of times, probably like 50 times or so with my own projects and clients and that kind of thing. And it's usually pretty reliable, but again, if you can support some local businesses, please feel free. That's a good thing to do. Now, if you're coming into this video from one of my other ones, particularly ones with the jacket or an upcoming vinyl one, which should be coming soon, there's going to be a couple of, or just a little bit of repeated information in this, just because there's going to be some people coming in here that are just doing a digipak and haven't watched the jacket. But anyways, so with Disc Makers, if you did want to get a digipak, and what this website does is you upload your art, upload your music, they kind of handle everything else. Once you pay them, they print them, package them, wrap them in plastic and all that good stuff. And a couple weeks later, you get a box on your doorstep and you open it up and there is your digipak. But anyways, you can check out all their pricing over here. But the thing is, when it comes time to actually make the album artwork, we always use, even if you've been doing it for years and are professional at doing album artwork, you always use templates. And there's a link to that right here at the top. And if we scroll down a little bit, first of all, you can see that it supports like pretty much every kind of program that you might be using. Obviously, you can't use things like Microsoft Word or Microsoft Paint, any of that stuff. But we're going to be using Photoshop. And they've got templates here for everything: digipaks, jewel cases, vinyls, eco wallets, jackets, all of that stuff. And if we're going to do digipak, that's the one right here at the top left. We would click on digipak templates. And the one that we're going to do is basically just going to be a simple 4-panel, 1-tray digipak, which is the most common one to do. It's also the cheapest. And over here on the right, next to, you can see over here, 4-panel. If I click on see how it folds, you get a little window that pops up. And it's kind of a cool thing. It's just going to show you how this is going to go together. And also a little preview of the artwork templates that we're going to get into in just a second. There we go. That's pretty cool. So what we're going to do first is I'm going to download that digipak template, which is a pretty small file, so it'll go pretty quickly. And then we also need to scroll down, and the disk, no matter what you do, whether it's a jewel case or any of those, is always going to be a separate file. So you click on download, and we're basically downloading two things: the digipak, and we're also downloading the disk. Now, templates, once you get into them, they all have kind of like code names or whatever you want to call them. And for digipaks, that is 4pan 1T, and the CD is always UD109. You can remember that, or it really doesn't matter. So now that if I go to my desktop, I'm just going to extract those. And if you're on Windows or a PC or Mac, most of this tutorial is going to be the same, even if I am working on a Mac. So what I've got is these two folders. One of them is called 4pen, and the other one is UD109. And the picture that we're going to be using in this tutorial, which is right here, this is from a website called Unsplash. And if you really need some good high quality images to use, Unsplash is a great site. It's just a bunch of free, do whatever you want photos that are high quality, high resolution. And while you typically wouldn't want to just copy and paste one of these pictures in and have that be your album artwork, it can be a really good place to start because the quality is great. But obviously creating your own stuff from scratch is definitely going to be the way to go. So we're going to use this photo, and we're going to kind of pretend that this is the cover photo that we want to use. All right. And inside each one of these folders, 4pen and also UD109, again, they come with file formats for like just about any program you'd want to use. And we just care about the .psd, which is the Photoshop. So if I just double click on, I already have Photoshop open down here. So if I double click on 4pen, right, and then I can go back and double click on UD109. There we go. And I've got both of those files open right here. Now, of course, with any tutorial, there's definitely going to be, I'm sure, some people out there with specific questions that this video won't answer. So feel free to ask any questions you might have down in the comments below. And I usually get back to them, if not same day, then within a day or two. I don't monitor my YouTube channel like 24/7 because my wife will punch me in the face. But I do get back to you pretty quickly. Now, Photoshop works, first of all, in a tab system right up here at the top, kind of like a web browser, and that lets you switch between any open projects that you have. And I always like to work on everything kind of all at once, so I'd have the Digipak and the CD, both of those things open side by side. And also there's a keyboard shortcut in Photoshop, which is the F key, and that cycles through the different screen modes that you might have, and that's basically full screen, preview, and then windowed mode, which is right here. And that's just kind of nice because especially in full screen, it lets you just kind of, the desktop gets shut off, no distractions, a little bit easier to work with. But now that we are in full screen mode, we don't have those tabs anymore. So there's a shortcut, Control Tab. And what that does is it basically just cycles through any open project that you might have. So you can kind of jump back and forth between one and go to the other while you're still in full screen mode, which is a good thing. So we're going to start on this one right here, which is the actual Digipak itself, the 4-panel. And now if you are coming from one of my other videos, I do explain some of this stuff in those, but just in case there's some new people here, let's take a look at what these lines mean. Because if you're new to this and you've never really done any kind of graphic design before, you open up one of these templates, it can be a little overwhelming. But it's actually nothing to be scared of. First of all, the template is set up in 2 layers. We've got a background or bottom called Your Artwork. And then right up here, we've got another layer called Template Guides. And in Photoshop, anytime you want to hide or reveal a layer, you just click that little eyeball icon next to it. And layers are how all projects in Photoshop are put together, kind of one piece at a time. And we'll see a little bit more about how that works in just a little bit. But this layer called Template Guides, right? Everything that you see here is right on that one layer. And if this is your first time doing this, I would recommend double clicking on where it says Template Guides and renaming it something like Guides, Keep on Top, because this layer, the guideline, should always be at the very top of your project always, because we're going to be kind of looking through it and using the guides to line up and crop all of our pictures so they fit perfectly in the template. Now over here, Digipaks, the way that they're put together is they are printed on one large sheet of paper, cut in a couple of very specific places, folded and glued, and that's what creates the package. So it's actually all done on one single sheet, even though we have a front cover, we have a spine, a back cover, inside panel, and then underneath the CD. They're all done in the exact same document, which could potentially make creating it a little bit complicated because you have all of these things going at once. But I'm going to show you a trick in a little bit that makes that really, really easy. But first, these lines. The pink line going around the edge, the solid pink, right? And you can look at the legend, it's called the trim line. That's where this is going to get cut. So that's going to be, think about it like the border of your Digipak. And in a perfect world where printers and cutting machines never made mistakes, you know, that that's all we would need. But I think everybody's probably had some sort of problem with the printer, and cutting machines are just as bad. So very often they're going to make mistakes that are off by like, I don't know, like a fraction of a millimeter. It's not usually that much, but that's why we have these other two lines, the blue and the green. Now the blue is called the bleed. That's just extra artwork, just in case, again, that cutting machine makes a little mistake. You don't have a white strip of blank page across all 500 of your album covers. And we also have the green line, which is the safety zone. So just to keep it simple, all you really need to remember is that, you know, artwork out to the blue, anything important like text, a track list, credits, that kind of thing should be inside the green boxes. And as long as you do that, again, the great thing about templates, and this is the industry standard way that you create album artwork, is they are standardized. So as long as their stuff fits within the template, and you need to absolutely obey the template, even if you've been doing this forever, it will print properly. And that's ideally, that's what we want. All right. So that's how the template works. If you still have some questions, feel free to ask me below and I'll get back to you. But we're going to kind of jump in here and start doing our front cover. Now, your first instinct might be to try and import that front cover picture. And that maybe it would not necessarily be a bad thing, because there's a lot of different ways that you could do this. I'm going to show you the way that I've kind of developed after doing just tons of these, and I've really loved doing it this way because not only is it easy, but it's also makes it extremely flexible, because you're able to bring in the background pictures and images that you want to use, and not only fit them in the template, but also you have the flexibility to resize them and move them, and it doesn't screw up the template itself. And we'll get into that in just a second. All right, let's go ahead and get zoomed in a little bit. Now, if you're working on a laptop, you can just pinch and zoom, which is nice. I'm working on my MacBook at the moment. But if you're on any other device, you can Command minus or Command plus, and that lets you zoom in and out. And I believe on a PC that is Control plus, Control minus, but I could be wrong. If I am, and it is entirely possible, it's been a while since I worked on a PC, there's also the zoom tool, which is at the bottom of your toolbar, and that lets you click to zoom in, or if you hold down the Alt key or Option on a Mac, it lets you zoom out. So either way works great. Now, what we can kind of see here is that our front cover, the bottom right corner is going to be right down here. All right. And then the top left corner is going to be right up here. Now, these dotted pink lines that you see, those are always indicate a fold line. So that's where this is going to get folded. So this outside of our Digipak, the front, the spine, and the back cover are all created side by side, and they get folded along these two pink lines. So what we're going to do, the first thing that I like to do is to set the boundaries of the thing that I'm trying to create, in this case, a front cover. And I do that using the rectangle tool, which is right here. The rectangle tool and this entire little section here is called the shape tool. This lets you obviously make a bunch of different kinds of shapes, squares, rectangles, polygons, and even the custom shape tool lets you basically make just about anything you want, like arrows, little envelopes, all kinds of very exciting stuff. Anyways, what we're going to do, right up here at the top, the fill color, and I apologize for the airplane in the background. If you can hear it, LA is a noisy, noisy place. We're going to set a fill color, which is basically the fill of our rectangle, what color it's going to be. We actually don't really care. I just want it to be something that is not white so that I can see it, and that's because our background is white. So there's a bunch of pre-made swatches here. I'm going to have a little bit more than you might have just because I have a bunch of colors saved from recent projects, but just pick anything that is not white. Even a gray is cool. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to bring my cursor right down here to the bottom right of this blue box, which is the bottom rightmost corner of the front cover. And I'm going to click and drag, and you can follow my cursor. I'm going to bring this up to, and ideally in Photoshop, if you're working in one of the newer versions, you should see these purple lines pop up. And you can see it kind of horizontally cutting across the middle. That is pretty helpful. It generally tells you that you are lined up with either a page, some sort of page boundary, or also the graphic that you're on top of, in this case, the template. So now I'm going to just click or release my mouse, and it might take a second, a little laggy there, but that's all right. And I have a big gray rectangle. How exciting. Also, the problem is at the moment, maybe you see this, maybe you don't, depending on how you've been working, but my rectangle is covering up my template. So in my layers window right here, I'm just going to take that rectangle layer and I'm going to click and drag and just drop that layer right below guides, keep on top. I'm also going to change the name of rectangle 1 to front cover. And the reason I do that is if you watch my other video with the jacket, that one's a lot simpler, and you don't necessarily need to get super in-depth with naming layers, but this one, because I have got a front cover, spine, back cover, all of this stuff, it definitely helps to keep things organized. So I've got this dimension here, or this rectangle that has defined the space that my front cover is going to inhabit. And now that I've done this, the next thing that I want to do is I want to bring in the picture that I would be, ideally be using for my front cover. And I do that by going up to File, Place Embedded, or if you can see your desktop, you can also drag and drop into Photoshop. It works pretty well and pretty much does the same thing. Now, this picture that you're going to be using for your front cover, again, this tutorial isn't necessarily about how to create beautiful album artwork. I will have a bunch of stuff coming up in the future for that. But this is something that you wouldn't necessarily want to be editing in this template because that can get overly complicated really quickly. You would want to be editing this and creating this picture or doing whatever you want to it in a separate document, saving it, and then bring it into the template because that's going to keep everything really nice and easy because you have all of this different stuff. Again, all these different sections, titles, track lists, all this stuff. And if you're editing pictures in this document and you're relatively new to Photoshop, it's just kind of like a recipe for disaster. So anyways, this picture's come in and yours might be a slightly different size or whatever. But the important thing is that we have placed this picture in and we are now in what's called free transform mode. And I can tell that because I've got this X over the top of the picture and I'm basically ready to resize this. But honestly, at the moment, I'm just gonna, right up here at the top middle, I'm gonna click the check mark because I don't necessarily want to worry about the size quite yet. We're going to do our little trick here that's going to make our life really easy. If I look at my layers window, what I've got is I have done my front cover, which is that rectangle, and then the layer right above it is that photo that I just dropped in. All right. And again, if you want to download this photo, there is a link in the description in the video that you can download it, or you can just use your own, which I think most people will be doing. But what I basically want to tell Photoshop is I want this photo to only display over the layer right below it, which is our front cover. And this is something that's really easy to do, but also extremely powerful. If I right click on that layer called photo, and a little menu pops up, I'm going to scroll down and I'm going to create a clipping mask, which is right here. All right, what a clipping mask does in Photoshop is basically it tells the program to, hide that picture anywhere outside of the layer that's right underneath it, or it's only going to display over the layer underneath. And it's a really cool technique. Like I use it for so many different things, and this is a really basic use of it. But you've probably seen things like let's see here. Anything like where I always use this example just because it's right there in Google. But you've seen text where there's a picture inside of it or something like that. That's all done using clipping masks. They basically, you make text in Photoshop, bring a picture in, make sure it's the layer right above it, set it to a clipping mask, and then all of a sudden that picture only displays over the text. So you can use them for a lot of cool things, but in this case, we're using them to basically as a fancy way to crop this picture. So now that our photo, that front cover picture, is displaying only over the front cover, now maybe I want to make changes to how it's framed or the sizing or that kind of thing. So to get back into free transform mode, which is what we were just in a second ago, that's a shortcut that is either Command T on a Mac or Control T on the PC. And that brings up our bounding box again. Now, one thing that's really important is when you're resizing pictures, especially pictures of people, you want to make sure to hold down the Shift key and then use the corner boxes, because if you don't, that picture can get stretched out in a very unfortunate way. So we want to resize this and place it. That looks pretty good. And every picture is going to be a little bit different, but I think framing on this picture is going to be really nice right about here with the window kind of in the middle of our album cover. And the girl here laying kind of also relatively centered, but maybe a little bit below center. And then once we have it the right size and placement, you can either click the check mark up at the top or you can hit the return key. All right, so now we've got our picture placed in here. And let me just zoom back in a little bit. Look at our front cover. And the next thing that we're going to do, and this is just going to be kind of quick. We're not going to get super in-depth into text creation in this tutorial, but if you have questions, feel free to ask below. We're just going to put in a title for our album, and we're just going to, this is basically just going to be a self-titled album. And there's going to be times when you maybe don't necessarily need to have the guides turned on. They're really only there to line stuff up, and now that we already know that our front cover is perfectly fit for it, I can click the eyeball next to guides, and it's just a little bit easier to put, titles and that kind of thing on the front cover because it's not being covered up by the guides. Anyways, let's go to our type tool. Over here in the toolbar, the text tool or type tool is the capital T. And if you've ever used a word processor, even like Microsoft Word or something like that, some of the stuff up here at the top is going to be relatively familiar because it really does exactly the same thing. We have our fonts, we have our size, our alignment. And alignment, of course, only matters when you're really doing multiple lines of text, which we're doing a title, so we're just doing the one. It really doesn't matter. And right here is our text color. And with this particular picture, I'm going to pick white because it's going to give us some nice contrast. And we're just basically going to do a title kind of right across the middle. Something really simple. Now I'm going to pick a font, and I'm just going to pick, let's see here, just something really simple and clean. Let's see. I'm going to go down to one called Railway, which is just a really clean, basic, modern font. And when it comes to fonts, I don't want to get too in-depth in this tutorial, but there is a website called defont.com, which maybe you know of already. It has, let's see, about 29,318 fonts, all of which can be downloaded and used. But one thing you definitely want to keep in mind is they are not all technically, legally okay to use. Above the download buttons, it's going to either say something like free for personal use or 100% free. And you generally want to use the ones that are either, it'll say public domain or 100% free, because as soon as you start using fonts on products that you might be selling, you could potentially run into problems if you don't have the actual rights to use that font. But if you find a font that you love, you could always do a little bit of legwork and find out, hey, who created this, and maybe buy the license for the font, which is not usually as expensive as you might think. But anyways, let's go back to Photoshop here. I'm just going to click, and I'm going to type out a title. And as soon as you click in Photoshop, I'm going to bump my text size up to about maybe 24 point or something like that. As soon as you click with the text tool in Photoshop, it automatically makes a new layer over here in our layers window. You can see that this big capital T tells us this is a text layer. Now I'm just going to type out very original album title. Wow. And as soon as I'm done typing, right up here at the top, I'm going to click the check mark, and I want to get out of text mode. That's what the check mark does. And then one of the most basic tools in Photoshop is one called the Move tool, which is right up here. And the Move tool, as you can probably guess, is literally just all about moving. All right, you can just click and drag and move that text around. Now, one thing that is kind of nice, maybe somewhere over here could be good. When it comes to changing the size of text, and this especially works well with something like a headline that's maybe only 1 or 2 words or 1 line of text, you could go back to the type tool and spend time finding the perfect font size up here, and that's cool and all, but there's actually an easier way. You can Command T, like we did a second ago, free transform text, and it's just faster and more visual, so you can find like that perfect text size right away. And once we've made the text, this would be a time when you would want to turn the template back on just to make sure that it is within the green. And that is the case, which is good. And now when it comes to this text, again, there's a lot of different places it could go. It could go right here, which looks pretty nice. It could potentially go somewhere right around here. It could maybe even like be a darker color and go up here in the window. And you can do all of that using just those basic text options and the move tool. All right. So we basically have put in our front cover photo, sized it perfectly for the template, put in a basic title, and obviously this is very simple, but we are now done with the front cover, and we can move on to the other parts of this. Now the thing is, when it comes to these templates, you can repeat that exact same process for every single section, including the spine, back cover, but when it gets to doing the inside left and inside right, the one thing that's going to be a little confusing, and we'll take a look at how to work with this in just a sec, is they're upside down. So you can't really make text and work the way you would normally do that, or do, but that's an easy fix. So all you need to do is, once you're done with your spine and back cover and all of that stuff, and real quick, when it comes to the spine, when you are free transforming text, so let's say you had clicked and you had typed out your spine text. When you are rotating text, and you do that just by bringing that cursor outside of the free transform box, if you hold down the shift key when you're doing that, it rotates it to very specific angles. So you can like just in 1 second get that perfect, vertical text just like that, and then you would place that on the spine. Now obviously that's way too big, so you would have to use a smaller font size for the spine, but that's how you do it. Now anyways, when it comes time to do the inside left and inside right, usually I like to do the front cover, spine, and back cover and get those, like, if not completely done, as far like as close to being done as possible. And then all you've got to do is you go up to image rotation, and we basically want to flip this, so we're going to rotate it 180 degrees. And there we go. Now we are right side up on our inside left and also the inside right here. And again, it's really just repeating that same process over and over again, using rectangles to define those sections. And then if you are going to use a picture instead of a solid color, you want to make sure that that photo is the layer right above it, right click, and set it to a clipping mask. And then you're able to move that picture inside just that given space. And it's also okay to just have sections of the album package be solid colors, like maybe right underneath the CD is just a solid black rectangle. That's kind of up to you as you design your album. Now we are going to, I'm just going to rotate this back again. Image rotation, 180 degrees. There we go. And I'm going to switch over to my CD. And remember, we opened that earlier, so I can just do Control Tab, and that switches me over to that document. There we go. So the CD is a little bit different just for the fact that it's a circle. But the thing is, when you are creating your graphics, you don't have to design or cut it in a circle. That just happens when it prints. And the CD graphic is actually always going to be a square. So we can see this big box here called the required bleed. That's going to be kind of the border or boundary of your graphic. So the only difference really with the CD is just the safety zone. Now in the Digipak or any other package, when it's you're working with a square or a rectangle, like the front cover, back cover, something like that, it's the safety is going to be a box, but on the disc it is a donut shape. And it's basically between this dotted green line here and this dotted green line right here. As long as your text is in between those lines or in that donut, it will print and it's going to look good on the disc. Also, you can see here there is a solid green line that says transition to mirror band / clear center. And that's noted here because if you ever flip the CD over, you can see that there's a section around the hole that is a slightly different material. And they note that because when you're making graphics on the actual disc, there's always going to be a little bit of like a color shift, and it's going to look slightly different inside this small ring than it does everywhere else on the CD. Right? Not a big deal, but you just want to be aware of that, and it's something that's going to happen. So what we're going to do here, I am just going to kind of what we did a second ago. We're going to do it one more time. I'm going to go to my rectangle tool. I need to make sure that the fill color up here is just anything that is not white so I can see it. And I'm going to bring my cursor right up here to the top left, or really any corner works fine. And I'm just going to draw a big box right over that big blue required bleed line. And then when I'm done, it's going to look just like this. Right, so I perfectly have done that with the boundaries. I've defined the boundaries of what my CD graphic is going to be. All right, and again, over here, make sure that that rectangle is underneath template guides. Template guides should always be up at the top like this. And then, you could obviously, when it comes to the disc, do something totally different, or maybe just keep it a solid color or something like that. But it's also okay to reuse that same graphic that you use on the front cover. So I'm going to go to File, Place Embedded, and I'm just going to bring that photo in. Just like that. All right. Looks pretty good. Now when it comes to the disc, you may have to get a little creative with the way that you frame it on the actual disc itself, because there is a hole in the middle, and you don't want, especially if you're using a picture of a person, for that to end up in kind of an unflattering position. So again, what I like to do first is, don't even really sweat the size or any of that stuff yet. Place it by either clicking that check mark or the return key. And then we're going to go into our layers window like we did earlier. We're going to right click on our photo layer and then scroll down and pick create clipping mask. And what that does, again, tells Photoshop to only display the photo over that rectangle, which lets us perfectly fit this to the template very quickly, very easily. And now I can go back to free transform, which is Command T. And maybe I want to kind of mess around with how this picture is on the disc. Like maybe I want her to be down here at the bottom instead of being chopped by that hole in the middle. And I can resize using Shift and the corners. And maybe I want a placement kind of like this, which could work pretty well. Again, if this was my front cover picture. So now I can see that the girl here, which is again the subject focal point, is within the safety zone. So, her face won't get cut off, and she's also not being cut by the hole in the middle of the disc. And if I was doing titles, I would kind of repeat that same process. Text tool, click, type, make sure it's within the safety zone, and you're good. That's, again, the great thing about templates. As long as it looks good here, when you print them, they're also going to look exactly the same. And wherever you get stuff printed, I can't recommend enough that even if it's an extra couple of bucks, to have them send you a proof before they do the full run of prints, just in case, because you don't want to do like 500 copies of your album where there's a mistake and then you're just stuck with them. Sometimes they will reprint, but sometimes they won't. And unfortunately, companies like disc makers especially, they're great, but they are a big company, and they're not really going to call you if there's a problem with your print. They're just going to print them because they do so many of them. So you really, it's on the person creating the album artwork to have everything look, really perfect in those templates. Now, speaking of printing, when it is time to get these printed, I'm just going to Control Tab, and we're going to jump back to the this one right here, which is our Digipak. Now, when you're printing, you obviously would not want to print it or save it with the template turned on. All right, so whatever you're about to print, you of course always want to just save it as a Photoshop file, because that keeps all of your layers and everything intact, so you can jump back in and make edits. But if I wanted to print, I want to go up to Guides, Keep on Top. We're going to turn that off, and we're basically going to be left with whatever your artwork is. Now, of course, in this video, because I don't want to make you sit through like 3 hours, we just did a front cover, but you would have the inside panel underneath the CD, the spine, and also the back cover over here. And also the back cover, just a quick note on that, if you're wondering about UPC codes, typically that's not something that you would create. It's something that disc makers provides, or your label or whoever you're working with is going to provide. And sometimes they'll put it on your back cover for you, or sometimes they'll send you a file that you would place embedded and bring in and put on the back cover. But anyways, once this is looking like this, meaning our template's turned off, that's a good thing. To save it to print, you would go up to File, Save As, just right up here. Right, and you can title it anything you want, but the important thing, we want to save this not as a Photoshop, but as a file called the Photoshop PDF. And obviously PDFs, probably have seen those before, and this is really the same thing. Photoshop PDF, and we want to turn this little layers option off. There are going to be some times when that's really not that big of a deal, but basically what that does is if it is selected, it increases the file size quite a bit. So if this is something that you want to be able to easily and quickly upload or email or something like that, this is going to help the file size just shrink quite a bit. And because we're just saving a print file, we don't really need the layers or anything, and we always have those in our Photoshop file. All right, now I'm going to click Save. And I got replaced because there's already a PDF in that folder, so let me just rename that to something else like Digipak. Save. And for the most part, these default options here are going to be fine for what we're doing, which is a high quality print. But you may run into some print shops that want a specific PDF standard, and you can select that from right here. Places like moo.com, which is a great place to get certain kinds of prints, will want a specific kind of PDF standard. And then all you've got to do is click Save PDF, and we have saved a print file. All right. And then you would do the same thing for the disk if you wanted to, save a print file for that. Now, one last thing real quick. Something that you don't really need to worry about because these documents are already set up that way, but you might want to just know at least a little bit about. There are two different color modes that you work with in digital graphics, pretty much all of them. They're RGB and CMYK. And basically, why does this matter? This matters because for the most part, any project that you do is going to basically be broken down into two categories, either print or web. What we're doing right now of Digipak obviously is for prints. So print projects use CMYK color mode, whereas anything else like stuff you would upload to the internet is going to be RGB. And it's called RGB just because the individual colors that make up all the pixels in your computer screen are red, green, and blue. That's how monitors and screens all display color. But they use those by mixing those three colors with light. But because paper obviously doesn't light up, printers use different colors to calculate the same thing that you see on the screen. They use cyan, magenta, yellow, and black. Black stands for key, which is why it's K. Doesn't make sense, but hey, whatever. All right. So what that means, and again, like I said, we don't need to worry about this because if you look up right up here in the tabs, our documents are already in CMYK color mode, meaning they're ready to print. And if you go up to image mode, you can see right here that they are CMYK color. But the reason that matters is if you look at that file, if I open it up here, I think it's in my 4pan. There we go. Sometimes when you're looking at those print PDFs on a computer screen, you might open it up for the first time. And if you've never done this before, you're going to be like, wow, that looks really washed out or faded or weird or bad. And that's totally normal. It's just because your computer screen is trying to display color in a language that it doesn't speak. So that's totally normal. So if you look at this, it's not bad. It just looks a little faded and not quite as good as it did in Photoshop a little bit ago. But again, not a big deal, totally normal, and it will print just fine. All right. So that was just a really quick overview of how to work with Digipak art templates. And hopefully you've got the tools to kind of put some of your music and or some of your artwork together for your music. But of course, if you've got any questions, feel free to let me know down below. I've got a bunch of other videos coming up, some more stuff on my channel as well. Like I'm going to go through kind of a similar thing, but how to create vinyl packages, and then also expanding into just a bunch of different more kind of artwork focused things, like how to create cool album covers and that kind of stuff. But hope you enjoyed it. Hope it was helpful. And if you want to check out my website, it's cassellgraphicdesign.com, or if you want to go listen to my band, it's orobasmusic.com. It's kind of live instrument electronic stuff. We do a lot of trip hop, post rock, and ambient, and a lot of very talented guest vocalists that have somehow, through persuasion, wanted or volunteered to perform on our album, which is great. But anyways, thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.